Today, House Bill 1, called the Protecting Children from Gender Mutilation Act, finally passed the Tennessee House of Representatives. It's legislation that will ban doctors from giving puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to children or performing gender, quote-unquote, gender reassignment surgeries on children. This law, which will soon be signed by the governor and then officially enacted, will actively save kids from one of the most sinister forms of child abuse the world has ever known. Laws just like it are being passed all across the country, which means not only that countless children will be protected from this evil, but also that the cultural tide is turning in a very real and measurable way. And that's not something that happens by accident. Now, it's true, as the saying goes, that culture is upstream from politics. And so this bill in Tennessee and others around the country are in large part a response to cultural changes. And those cultural changes are not incidental, but rather the direct result of work that has been done by many people in many places, including us here, of course, at the Daily Wire. As for myself, you know that I've been fighting against gender ideology for many years, yet for much of that time, fighting, like it does so often for me, for much of that time, fighting meant simply, talking about it. And there is value in talking about things, of course, but our problem as conservatives is that too often we just leave it there. We talk and talk and talk, and we're in the talking phase the whole time. And when that doesn't work, we talk some more. It feels fruitless after a while, and it is, if there's no escalation, no next phase. Talk is impotent if it isn't coupled with action. And so a couple of years ago, I decided that it was time for action, and a short time later, we published Johnny the Walrus. We've had a lot of fun with the very hilarious fact that I'm a best-selling LGBT children's author, and the book itself is funny and meant to be, but it also has a serious purpose. It's an actual children's book meant for children, which has now been read by and to many children, and which is supposed to be an antidote to the gender ideology and indoctrination that pervades the children's section in nearly every bookstore in America. The book would go on to sell over 100,000 copies in a few months. We were not the first conservatives to publish a children's book with a quote-unquote conservative outlook on a current issue, but ours was certainly at least among the most successful in that category. Now, when the book was published, we had already begun filming What is a Woman? And in January of 2022, though the movie wasn't complete yet, we had filmed enough to be sure that we had something significant on our hands. And that's when I announced publicly that 2022 would be the year when we wage an all-out assault on gender ideology. And I promised that we would be dealing it some major blows that year. And I wanted to call the shot so that people would know that this is all part of a plan. I wanted our allies to know that. I wanted our enemies to know that. That month, my episode of Dr. Phil was released and went viral. A few months later, What is a Woman came out, took the country by storm. And then in the fall, with all the momentum we had built up, we set out to expose and shut down Vanderbilt's child mutilation clinic. A few weeks after that report, clinic was shut down. We're holding a rally in the state capitol. Thousands of people were there. Several lawmakers attended the rally, announced that they would work on legislation to ban the practice in Tennessee. And then this week, that bill passed and now awaits the governor's signature. While similar bills work their way through the legislatures in many other states, or in some cases have now been passed. Now, lots of people on the right talk about fighting and call themselves fighters. But when I say that we're fighting here at the Daily Wire, this is what I mean. And of course, none of this is possible without our members, the films, the books, the investigative work, the rallies, everything else. Can't do any of that or achieve any of the victories without people who support us and support our work, and by supporting it, contribute to it. So I use the word we when I talk about all these things because this truly is a we operation. Like I said already, I was talking about this for many years, but only talking. I can talk on my own. I don't need anybody else for that. I can talk all day. But I needed the Daily Wire and all of you to actually do all of these things. That's why your membership is so important. And this work becomes all the more important as the other side continues its own escalation. So, for example, there's another bill soon to be passed here in Tennessee, which would outlaw sexual performances for children. This would have the effect of primarily banning quote-unquote family-friendly drag shows. And the reason that I say it would primarily ban those is that drag queens are the primary ones who are most eager and insistent on performing in front of kids. Which is all the more reason. So it's a little bit like if I said that, stealing is illegal and that primarily affects kleptomaniacs. Well, it's not a bill that says only kleptomaniacs can't steal, but if you have a compulsion to steal, then in a certain way, you might say that you're more affected by that bill. But that's because of you. That's a you problem. It's your own fault. And it's the same thing here. So the drag queens who feel targeted by a bill that won't let them sexualize children, well, if it targets you, that's only because you have this, apparently, by your own confession, this special compulsion to engage in that kind of behavior, which is all the more reason why you shouldn't be allowed to. But a leftist activist and drag queen who goes by the name Bella Dubal addressed a crowd here in Tennessee a few days ago, and he had his own suggestion for how the opponents of this bill ought to respond. Leftists on social media have applauded this speech, called it defiant and brave, and it is at least one of those things, the former, that is. Let's watch.
This is an attempt to erase drag in Tennessee. This bill will further harm trans people who are literally just living their lives. I need you to contact your House representative and tell them this will not stand. Urge them to vote no, because if they don't, this will make public pride illegal this year. Now, if you don't know, we've been having public drag in Tennessee for over 50 years, and Pride began to commemorate the events of Stonewall. Back in Stonewall, we weren't allowed to do drag. It was criminalized. And so what happened when the cops came in and tried to beat us down? We picked up them bricks and sent them packing. The original Pride was a riot. And if this year we need to remind them that we will fight for our liberation. We will raise our bricks high again and let them know that we will not go quietly. I may need your help with legal fees because mama ain't quitting. I'll get arrested. I don't care. Somebody's got to be first. We'll sue the state. But whatever happens, we are queer people. We are very strong, and we will rise. Thank you so much, y'all, for enduring that. Let's get back to your drag show. I would introduce myself, but that is the least southern thing that a lady can do.
So to be entirely clear, this drag queen is calling for violence because he won't be able to perform strip teases in front of children anymore. That's how important grooming is to this groomer. He would rather kill than be deprived of his right to sexualize small children. But why is this so important to him? Why can't he just be satisfied to perform his whole weird and depraved routine in front of adults behind closed doors? There was no movement to outlaw drag until you brought children into it, so why can't you just leave them out of it? The answer is partly that they get a sexual thrill, apparently, out of cross-dressing and dancing for kids. It's part of the fetish for them, and they will kill to protect their fetish because their fetish is their whole identity. It's all they have. It's all they are. It's all they've chosen to be. The other answer is that drag shows for kids are part of their master plan for indoctrinating and desensitizing the youngest generations. They can't convince the kids to enjoy this stuff, but they can condition them to accept sexual perversion as normal. And the sooner they're exposed to it, the easier that is to do. That's a large part of the point. The third part of the explanation, this is an essential thing to understand if you're trying to figure out why these people would threaten to murder others because you're not going to let them strip for children. The other part is simply that they are raging narcissists who have never been told no until now. We have been a disastrously permissive culture, convinced that the worst thing we can ever say to anyone, especially an LGBT activist, is no. And now they've become convinced that they have the right to never be told no because they've never been told no. Gender ideology and LGBT activism is all just sexualized narcissism anyway. They've made narcissism their entire worldview, and they're reacting as any narcissist does when you tell him, no, you can't do that. You cannot do whatever you want. There are rules you will follow. It doesn't matter if you don't like it. Your desires do not supersede the law, whether the laws of man or of God. Your desires do not supersede either. They can't handle this news. They don't know what to do with it. Keep in mind, these people honestly believe that they have the right not just to be tolerated, but to be celebrated. I've made this observation many times, but don't take it from me. Here's a trans HHS official, Rachel Levine, in a resurfaced video that went viral this week, stating this point explicitly. Listen.
What I like to say is, in terms of diversity, I mean, diversity is so powerful for any organization, and diversity in all of its different aspects, including for sexual and gender minorities. You don't want to have a tolerant environment. Gee, thanks for tolerating me. I really appreciate that. An accepting environment is good, but you really want to work on a welcoming and even a celebratory environment for diversity in all of its aspects, including for LGBTQ individuals. Hershey approached that.
We must celebrate him, he tells us. Long gone are the days of leave us alone, let us have our privacy. That was always a bait and switch, obviously. Because now, actually, to leave them alone would be an attack on them. That's an attack. It is your obligation to not leave them alone, but rather to lift them on your shoulders like Rudy at the end of the movie and parade them around while the crowd cheers. This demand for celebration is, again, partly a tactic, but it's also a sincere expression of their overwhelming, suffocating narcissism. For people who demand celebration and who claim the right to do literally anything they want, up to and including holding sex shows for toddlers, is it any wonder that they react with such demonic fury when we not only don't celebrate, but actively fight against their agenda? Yesterday, the trans activist Aaron Reed published a tweet thread which garnered 40,000 likes, in which he claims that the laws being passed in places like Tennessee and elsewhere represent an actual genocide against trans people. And he meant it literally, even provided the UN definition of genocide to prove his case. But of course, the definition disproves his case, but that's not the way he sees it. It's not meant as hyperbole when these people talk this way. They actually see it as equivalent to genocide if anyone tells them no. If any limitations are placed on the trans activist or the LGBT activist at all, if any attempt is made to control any of their behavior, it is genocide. Murdering an entire group of people and tossing their bodies in a mass grave is on the same moral playing field as telling Aaron Reed that he can't strip in front of kids or chemically castrate, a 12-year-old. Indeed, calling Aaron Reed him, as I just did, in the first place, is genocide, an act of evil indistinguishable from the Holocaust. This is what they honestly believe. And it's what happens when self-obsession becomes identity and identity becomes religion. And their rage only increases all the more as they realize that this kind of hysterical yammering, along with the threats of violence and the attempts at deplatforming and shouting bigot and labeling and all that, as they begin to realize that this isn't going to work anymore. It did work for a long time, but it doesn't work anymore. Because they're now dealing with adversaries who cannot be manipulated or cowed into silence that easily or at all. And that's why I will conclude here by assuring you, Aaron Reed, and you, the drag queen threatening violence, and the rest of your ilk, that we aren't even remotely done, okay? This is honestly only the beginning. We've got a lot more in store for you. I promised you a year ago that we were going to war here, and I kept that promise. I'll keep this one too. There's much more to be done that needs to be done, and we aim to do it. So the battle continues, whether you like it or not. And that'll do it for this portion of the show. As we move over to the members block. If you're not a member yet, become a member and use code Walsh at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Hope to see you there. If not, talk to you tomorrow. Godspeed.